So, well, welcome to these reflections from pharmacy leaders advancing the profession. It's my pleasure to have with us here Brian Erstad, Dr. Erstad, who's department head at the University of Arizona and professor at the University of Arizona School of Pharmacy. Dr. Erstad is recognized by the Society of Critical Care Medicine for his numerous contributions, and he's recognized as a master clinical teacher of excellence in bedside teaching. You know, that's been his major contributions in the area of clinical pharmacy education and research. He is currently president of ACCP, the American College of Clinical Pharmacy, and he has served on FDA advisory committees over the years, and he's recognized for his clinical practice and education in the area of critical care. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Erstad. So the first question I have, we'd like to learn more about your journey to your development as and recognition as a leader. And in that you could reflect on key events or key people that influence you as you developed in your journey.
All right, well, I'll start where it began, which is back in South Dakota when I got a BS degree in pharmacy. And at the time I went into it for all of the wrong reasons. I didn't know what else I was going to do with my life, and my roommate was transferring up to the college to go into pharmacy, so I thought I would go join him as his roommate. And I actually wasn't too impressed with pharmacy, and frankly I was even thinking of switching over to go into medical school. And then finally I got a rotation in a clinical setting in a hospital with the first PharmD in South Dakota. And that actually changed how I looked at pharmacy. I thought, this is what I thought pharmacy was supposed to be about. And so I thought, I'm going to stick with this for a while. And maybe I can even at some point get one of those pharm degrees, because at the time I was just graduating with a BS degree in pharmacy. So I graduated that degree, worked 8 or 9 years in community hospitals, several years in Western South Dakota, and then several years down here in Tucson, and sort of waiting to go back and get that PharmD degree. And I finally did apply, got in, and graduated, did residency, and then turned out I was hired here at the University of Arizona as a clinical assistant professor. And I started a clinical service. I actually started initially in a surgery service, but I could see the way of the world was changing, and our hospital was becoming more acute care, and ended up becoming a critical care practitioner and rounding with the physicians. And then about midway through my career, as a professor, I turned out I was doing more research and publishing more papers, and so I switched to the tenure track and did get tenure, and eventually became a full professor with tenure, and then was assistant department head for many years, and then finally I became department head. And all along that path, I've done a lot of service, both internal and external, and I'll probably address some of that in some of the later questions. So why don't I leave it at there for the intro.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you very much, Brian. So what do you think will be your legacy in 20 to 30 years? And I paraphrase this question by saying, what are you most proud of in terms of your contributions to help advance the pharmacy profession?
Yeah, I think legacy, that's kind of makes me pause a little when I hear that. I guess some of the things that I would like to be remembered for are some of my interprofessional activities and expanding the frontiers of pharmacy as a profession beyond pharmacy. I've been very lucky in the latter part of my career to get invited to be on a lot of high-level positions with professional organizations, governmental organizations, et cetera. And in many cases, I'm the only PharmD on them. In many cases, I'm dealing with all physicians, for example. And so I've really have, for the latter part of my career now, I guess one of my passions, and I guess you could say hopefully it'll be a legacy, is that I've really done a lot of interprofessional things and extended the frontiers of pharmacy. As a matter of fact, the theme as ACCP president, my theme is extending the frontiers of practice, interprofessional collaborations, and research. And I think that theme that I have as ACCP president actually summarizes what I'd like to think is my legacy. Some of those initials that you had trouble figuring out pronouncing at the beginning are a good example. Some of the things that I guess I'm most proud of are things that really weren't awards or honors within the pharmacy profession. One is this Shubin-Weil Award as a teacher, bedside clinician teacher, and that's one. Again, I was the first, and at the time the only PharmD to receive that award. I think since then there's been one other PharmD, but it was a whole line of physicians for many years, and so that's one where many people I even work with, they don't recognize that award when they see it. It's like, what does this really mean? But ironically, the fact that it was given to me primarily by a group of physicians and arguably some nurses, so more of an interprofessional award. I don't like to use the word pride too much, but I guess that's something I'm happy that I received.
Wonderful. So the next question has to deal with advice for students in their professional journey as they develop as leaders.
And I think for me, it's interesting timing actually for this Zoom, because I have a column that'll be coming up in an ACCP newsletter, I think within the month, and guess what? It's on leadership. So the timing for this Zoom was very good, and I refer in there to 6 P's, and that I think are characteristics of a leader, and I won't go through all of them, but let me list one in particular that I feel pretty strongly about, and that's perseverance. There are a lot of people, and I've seen many people in my career who were a lot smarter than I am, and they either burned out quickly or end up, in some cases, even leaving the profession. And to me, it was such a shame because they could have done so much. And I think so much of it is again, perseverance. I'm aware personally of a student, to give an example, a student that's been dealing with Crohn's most of his life, had panic disorder issues, and yet that person has persevered and made it through, and is again just an outstanding person, outstanding professional. And so I think that is the key that I would really stress. And I know, again, it's been true for me. Matter of fact, I'll use the example when I was getting my BS degree. I was getting by. I definitely wasn't getting stellar grades, but I didn't really know why I was in pharmacy. As I said, I didn't like it at the time. So I thought it was sort of an average Joe. And then I went back to get my PharmD degree. And by that point, I was very motivated. I'd worked 8 or 9 years in community hospitals. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was giving up a well-paying job to do it. And so you can bet I was very motivated. And suddenly people started looking at me as though, wow, this guy is incredibly sharp, and top of the class, everything else. And it's like, no, I'm the same person I was before. I just had persevered, and now I was motivated. I had a real reason to learn the material, and I knew how I would use it in terms of patient care and research and things like that. And so that's, again, I'll let you read my article to look at the other 5 P's that I think are important to leadership, but that's a big one for me. I would also make one other point. I'm very evidence-based. I think it's because of my clinical background and always having to prove my worth to other clinicians, especially physicians. And so even when I approached this topic of leadership for this ACCP report, I actually did a literature search. I tried to find literature behind being a leader. And what I found is that there's a whole lot of opinion and not a lot of what I would call evidence. I think I found over 650 different definitions of a leader. So again, a lot of things out there, but it does end up, I think, coming down to some personal characteristics. That seems to be a theme with almost all the definitions of leadership. They almost all revolve around personal characteristics. And I have my list that, again, you'll see in that report.
I'd like to hear another one of the P's. We have a little bit of time. Share one other P.
Well, persuasiveness, I think, is another example. Mm-hmm. I think we underestimate, you can't force people to do things. It's all about persuasion. I'll give you an example of this. I actually received an ACP Innovations in Teaching Award for this idea where we basically brought debates into a kinetics class. And when we brought these debates into the kinetics class, my whole reason behind it was that in debate, you're trying to persuade. And again, you can't just ram something through. It doesn't work that way. You're trying to persuade people. And I have to do that all the time in the clinical setting. And I think that's true of life, that, it's easy to say, here's the way you ought to do it and try to, again, ram it down somebody's throat. But ultimately, the way you're really going to get people to do things is to persuade them to do it. And that's the whole concept behind things like servant leadership. At times when someone else needs to take the lead and you sort of step back. And so, that's a good example of another one. A positive attitude, I'll give you another P. I'm such a huge believer in having a positive attitude. It's easy to be a cynic, but I'm more in the Descartes realm of you want to have a healthy skepticism. I believe even our students, it's fine to question me. Matter of fact, when they question me, even in an experiential setting, it's like, fine, don't believe me, go look it up for yourself. Here's the answer that I think is right from years of experience, but look it up on your own and hopefully you'll come to the same conclusion. But so a healthy skepticism is good. I encourage it. You just don't want it to turn into a cynicism. Mm-hmm. So now I've given you a couple more of those people.
Yeah, you gave me some. Very good. I appreciate that. And I look forward to reading that article in the newsletter. My final question has to do with, since this is a history class, we're studying the evolution of the profession over the last 150 years. And as we study the decade of the 2020s, one of the key I'll call it a turning point, the key event in this decade will probably be COVID-19 pandemic. So how do you see that being an opportunity for the profession? And we know through history that key happenings in the world has shaped our profession, has helped us to evolve as a profession.
Yes, as I'm now dealing with COVID, and I'm dealing with this in a couple of ways. I still, believe it or not, try to periodically go around with our specialty residents in critical care and dealing with it as a department head and all the administrative issues. And so a lot of my plate right now. But for me, on the other hand, is deja vu all over again. And the reason I say that, and this will point out a couple earlier things in my career. Earlier in my career, I was on a disaster medical assistance team, a DMAT. And I was in that for many years. I actually ended up being deployed to Hurricane Ivan, which was the hurricane prior to Katrina. And I won't go into the details of that, but it was a real learning experience. And as a matter of fact, I remember when I got off the plane, I was greeted by emergency medicine physician. And the first words out of his mouth is, "Boy, am I glad you're here." Because suddenly the physician realized that he had to deal with all these meds that he wasn't used to using. It was you could think of it as a different formulary, the government formulary. And so the idea of having someone to help figure that out, I think was somewhat a relief. And then along with that, actually it turned out Hurricane Katrina came along and they wanted to deploy me for that, but it turned out that I was needed here in Tucson because we were getting people from New Orleans area being shipped into our Tucson to our city convention center. And they wanted to have pharmacy services provided for those people that were brought in. So I actually felt obligated to stay here. And I was one of the co-leaders trying to set schedules, et cetera. And just to make things more complicated, the physician leading the effort at the time from the public health department came up and said, "By the way, I'd like to do unit dose on all of the people in the convention center." So not only were we providing emergency services, but basically we were being asked to run it just like we would an inpatient hospital pharmacy. And we did. And again, but I was setting people up for shifts and doing all the legwork, all the things you have to do in this and set up a pharmacy in real time. And so those experiences, I think they showed what pharmacy can do during these trying times. And I guess what I'd like to think is that COVID, like those experiences, will show how pharmacy can step up in trying times and really show our worth and ultimately advance the profession. And often in those examples that I've named in many of those cases, as I said, I was the only pharmacist, and there are times I felt like the entire profession was resting on my shoulders. It was like the entire profession was being judged by how I did with this particular activity, whether it was associated with that critical care organization or some of these other groups I've been on, as I said, where I'm the only PharmD. But on the other hand, that's a real opportunity for the advancement of our profession. And so that's what I'd like to think, is that pharmacists would show, hey, we can really do a lot of things, and we can really ultimately help the patients that we serve. And that's what I'd like to think would come out of this. There is one quote and I also have this in my article, and I thought this is kind of a good one when it comes to leadership, and probably a good one to end on. It was one by Abraham Lincoln. I've actually been rereading. There's a couple books by Michael Burlingame from Johns Hopkins, a 2-volume edition of Abraham Lincoln that I've been rereading. And one of the quotes that was in there about leadership was, don't worry when you are not recognized, but strive to be worthy of recognition. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's, to me, a good final point on leadership.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to add that to our book list. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and thank you again.
Absolutely.